There's another house beneath our basement. My wife Sandy and I recently moved into a housing development a half-hour outside of the city. We set up most of our things, furniture and the like, though we still had boxes to unpack. When storing a few summer chairs and other less essential items in the large basement, I noticed an acrid smell that only worsened when it rained. Before moving in fully, I wanted to fix whatever mildew or animal remains might be causing the issue. While Sandy was at work in her home office, I descended the creaky open stairs wearing a dust mask and brandishing a spray bottle of bleach like some antiseptic cowboy. The basement has no windows, mind you. It's just a four-cornered concrete space, empty aside from a few cardboard boxes of old items I'd carried down a week earlier. I began inspecting the concrete walls for mold spots or water damage but found no source of the foul odor. It was as standard and minimal as a basement could be, aside from the lack of windows. Then, after a bit of following the scent trail, I found it. Underneath the stairs in the corner, where the two walls and floor met, was a slab of ever so slightly mismatched concrete. I stared at the rectangular seam in curious wonder. I realized there was likely a burst pipe below that had been sloppily fixed by a previous tenant. After living in the city for 15 years, I was used to landlords pulling quick and dirty fixes to avoid out-of-pocket work. This was our home now though, and I was determined to fully repair it before we settled in. As the afternoon faded into evening, Sandy was still shut in her study editing books. She's the breadwinner, so I went to work, donning my rattiest pair of jeans and a t-shirt I'd ruined when painting the rooms. I descended the creaky wooden stairs into the basement, ready to bust open the concrete rectangle below them. It turned out the concrete slab wasn't even sealed, and it lifted easily with my crowbar. I slid it aside with a rumble to reveal an old stone stairway descending down to a further level, a sub-basement. It looked ancient, much older than the rest of our house. Our home was estimated to be from the 1960s, but the cobbled rocks in the stairs descending into shadow looked to be a few hundred years old. I looked down into the darkness then climbed back up the rickety wooden steps to my home. I headed into the garage, searching through unpacked boxes of tools before finding my flashlight. Curiosity grew as to what could possibly be down there. I was well aware that many people built fallout shelters in the 60s in preparation for a looming nuclear war. I first wondered if it could be one of those, but it clearly predated 20th century construction. My next guess was a hiding spot built to help the Underground Railroad. I'd seen similar hidden spaces in old Quaker farmhouses to help hide runaway slaves, something I respected greatly. Once I began my descent, however, I realized that this was neither of the aforementioned. My jaw hung open at the discovery. There was a room-by-room copy of the first story of our home in the hidden sub-basement. Every dividing stone wall and doorway was identically placed. I stared in awe when I realized the outer walls even held windows in the same locations. Warped, thick glass reflected my flashlight's beam. I approached one in amazement, staring at a worm squirming against a pane that seemed to barely hold in a wall of compacted dirt. I continued into the familiarly laid out abode, observing the ancient stone walls. Every wall, windowsill, and fixture was similarly placed as in our home up above, yet everything was archaic and spooled with long-abandoned cobwebs. There were cast-iron hinges on each of the petrified wooden doors. A thick layer of dust clung to every mantel and surface, which looked speckled and stained with centuries of use. Most bizarre of all was the fact that not only was the floor plan of our home above replicated, but every bit of furniture that we'd moved in so far had an antique matching set. It was like a time-warped version of our home, down to the furniture itself. A pre-Victorian sofa sat in the exact location as ours, its threadbare cushions deflated from wear and decay. I nearly yelped when I saw a centipede wriggle out from a hole in the cushions. I glanced around to see stained wooden chests from a bygone era in the exact same locations as the cluster of cardboard boxes that lay unpacked up above. My flashlight's pale beam danced with motes of weightless dander as they illuminated the most notable difference. Though each piece of furniture was in place, the cold stone rooms were all devoid of lamps or even candles. I walked onto the mirror version of our kitchen. Within, there was a mortar and pumice filled with a congealing black paste on a wooden countertop scarred with lines from a heavy blade. It was in the same location as the blender I were up smoothies in each morning. It was beyond coincidence. It was as if our place had been studied and recreated with furnishings and tools from another time. My heart pounded in my chest as paranoia built. I darted the circular flashlight beam through the shadows, which raced and jumped behind uneven tables and speckled jars of dried herbs. Then I noticed the dark wood of the front door. It was in the exact spot as our own. I approached it as curiosity brimmed. What could it even lead to? My pulse quickened. Everything felt wrong. like I was exploring some part of the world that was not meant to have been discovered. Some arcane place that had been hidden for centuries for good reason. I couldn't stop my legs from walking forward or my twitchy hand reaching out, though. The need to know what lay beyond that door was immeasurable. I grabbed the cast iron latch handle, pressing the cold metal mechanism down and hearing an echoing click. I then pulled it open, half expecting an avalanche of dirt to spill in over me, but only cold air met my face, and I at once sensed the open space before me. I aimed the flashlight's beam into the darkness and felt a tremble in my bones. On the ground before me was a cobblestone pathway leading out into a vast limestone cavern. I aimed the flashlight upward to the roof, illuminating the long fangs of 1,000 stalactites sprawling out past where my light could penetrate. It looked endless. A massive cave system was hidden beneath our home. Then I heard a sound, an echoing set of clicks from deep within the absolute blackness of a space with no light of its own. It was a familiar clicking, but not the drips of the limestone nor the rattle of debris. My stomach squirmed as my mind made a connection that filled me with a bitter realization. It was the clicking of a tongue. I aimed the beam forward, reaching my arm out fully as if it would somehow light up the source, and it did reflect off of something. 2 gleaming circles, from deep in the shadows. 2 eyes that were watching me from the cold tunnel. I backtracked slowly, praying my movement would be unnoticed. I tensed with each sound my sneakers made as I stepped back towards that strange, mirrored home below our basement. Then, fast approaching steps echoed as they loudened. The clicking sped up too, blending into a gravelly croak. Whoever was down there was racing towards me, and I ran. I raced back into the copied house and slammed shut the heavy door, which muffled the grating clicking that approached. I ran through the ancient home, only then noticing that the stains on each wooden surface were dark and spattered. Each wooden counter was textured with nicks and grooves reminiscent of a cutting board. I raced towards the stairwell, turning back at the sound of an explosive bang as the heavy front door was flung open, and I caught a glimpse of something that could have been mistaken for a man had I not held that beam which drew features from the shadows. Milky white eyes and a gaping mouth far too large, similar to the unhinged jaws of a feeding snake. It wore clothes reminiscent of early North American settlers, Puritan or maybe Pilgrim, something that belonged in colonial times. It wore a heavily stained and exaggeratedly large collar, more like a ruff, and matching cuffs caked black with filth. The fingers were too long and swollen at each knobby knuckle. Those eager digits extended like Alaskan crab legs as they reached towards me. My heart pounded and iced over in dread as I climbed the stairwell back up into our basement. I slid the cement slab over the opening. Just as it came into view, the gaping mouth emitting a bassy clicking that vibrated my guts. I lay down on top of the cement slab of a trapdoor to keep it in, half expecting it to launch me up and off before those long fingers speared into and eviscerated me. I knew I had to protect my wife, so I lay there, stiff as a board, ready to resist. Then the door above me creaked open. Sandy. I was about to yell up to her to get an overnight bag and to start the car. I expected she'd ask questions, but I'd tell her we were in danger and I'd explain later. I was about to issue orders, but I closed my throat tight, swallowing the breath that might form the first word. I lay still as I could and hushed my breath as I watched, through the gaps in the wooden stairs, the tattered fabric of a long, antiquated dress swaying against filthy, buckled shoes. I laid there, making sure my phone was in silent mode, careful not to shift the keys in my pocket. I have been here for hours now, piecing things together, like how they might have copied the furniture placement of our home in order to learn it and easily navigate it without sight. I watched those strange shoes between the top 2 stairs, praying they'll just retreat back inside to give me a window of time in which to escape, praying they won't descend the 12 steps between us once my stomach finally rumbles from hunger, or the fetid stink from below finally causes me to cough. I just lie here in silence atop the cement trapdoor, listening to that awful sound that stopped me from speaking in the first place, that throaty clicking from up above.